There we go. Okay. All right, I've got a little bit of a recap. For you newer people, you get the idea of what I'm doing here pretty quickly. And I'm going to kind of recover something that was brought up last week. And there was a bit of controversy over it, but I think it will be useful for continuing the discussion, because today we may run a little bit late because we're going to finish section 8. Because I have a different kind of expectation from you for next week. So here we go. Okay, this is the argument so far. The Apollinian and Dionysian are, metaphorically, contrary, unmediated natural artistic forces. The world of self-consciousness, symbolic dream-inspired images, form, and beauty, versus the fundamental Dionysian world of intoxicated reality, with its total dissolution of the self, its pain, and contradiction. With highly developed Apollinian sensitivity, the Greeks created the pantheon of Olympic gods, eternally alive and very human, which hid the Dionysian reality and celebrated life and reversed the wisdom of Syllabus, which was, it's better never to have been born, opening the artistic door to what would become Greek tragedy, a perfect fusion of the contrary artistic instincts. The first evidence for this fusion is symbolically contrasted between the epic poetry of Homer, the Apollinian artist of lovingly crafted dream images, and the Dionysian artist of lyric poetry with his cries of pain and suffering, but expressed in Apollinian imagery. Because the world of appearance representation is the redemption of the Schopenhauerian will. We, ourselves, and the cultured world around us are works of art. And, quote, it is only as an aesthetic phenomenon that existence and the world are eternally justified. Nietzsche's break with a moral interpretation of the world. Lyric poetry is dependent on the spirit of music, which represents the will itself. The tragic chorus of satyrs and the Dionysian dithyramb, an Apollinian artistic representation of music, can be considered the proto-drama. Confronted by it in the chorus, the cultured Greek finds himself enraptured by the Dionysian satyr's ecstatic performance, gains knowledge of the painful contradiction at the heart of the world, and experiences nausea at his return to reality and the revealed futility of continued existence. But, quote, art saves him, and through art, life, end quote. This is the theme that has not been developed in any depth yet. So this is a little piece of section 7 that I passed over the last time, but I want to make sure that we do kind of catch this. And this is a quote from Nietzsche. Schiller regards the chorus as a living wall that tragedy constructs around itself in order to close itself off from the world of reality and to preserve its ideal domain and its poetic freedom. It is an ideal domain, as Schiller correctly perceived, in which the Greek satyr chorus, the chorus of primitive tragedy, was wont to dwell. It is a domain raised high above the actual paths of mortals. Here, Dylan, we're continuing now. Now this is new. Here, when the danger to his will is greatest, art approaches as a saving sorceress, expert at healing. She alone knows how to turn these nauseous thoughts about the horror or absurdity of existence into notions with which one can live. These are the sublime as the artistic taming of the horrible, and the comic as the artistic discharge of the nausea of absurdity. The satyr chorus of the dithyramb is the saving deed of Greek art. Faced with the intermediary world of these Dionysian companions, the feelings described here exhausted themselves. So the question is the artistic effect that Nietzsche is describing a restatement of Aristotle's opinion in his Poetics. Tragedy, then, is an imitation of an action through pity and fear, affecting the proper purgation of these emotions. Is that what Nietzsche is describing? Because I think it is. I think it's an analog, at the very least, to that notion, that is what art does. That the nausea that they feel, that the audience feels when the tragedy is over, at this awareness that there is not much point in at all, is overcome by the drama and the comedy of the performance itself. James.
Yeah, I think there's a subtle difference. That's Aristotle's comment in the Poetics. The moods of pity and fear are evoked by tragedy,
James,
and basically what Nietzsche's comment. Oh, can you hear me? Okay.
No.
James, let me stop you.
I'm sorry.
Your internet is not. Can you turn your? Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. I think James.
Yes, I hear you fine.
James, can you turn your video off? Then maybe we can hear what you're saying, because you're breaking up badly.
Yeah. Okay. So.
All right. How is it now?
Better. Yeah, it's better.
Okay. So anyway, yeah, I was going to say that the pity and fear is Aristotle's comment, and I'm kind of I text he's saying that the moods that the emotional moods play themselves out in the middle world
James
of the Dionysian
James
attendance. I don't have again.
James, we have a bad connection on your end. Why don't you check out and come back in?
Yeah, James, you probably need to log out and log in again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really terrible. Even
I have really bad news. I'm using a new cable modem today. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Anybody else want to offer a comment on that? I think that's essentially what Nietzsche is saying, but you might have a different thought. And it appears that nobody has a different thought. Well, okay then. I don't know if I should wait for James to come back or just move on. What do you think, Jason? Yeah, Jason.
I think what James want to say is different. And that's what I think,
Oh yeah, okay. Nick.
Yeah, I think it's a little different too, because on the on the discussion, there's a place here where I think Nietzsche is saying that when you're in the Dionysian, there's a separation of reality from the ecstatic reality of Dionysius from the everyday reality. That's kind of comes in, and then when the everyday reality comes back in, you're nauseated. So to me, the big thing about the Dionysian is it removes you from the everyday reality and puts you in a more, shall we say, ecstatic, closer to more passionate, maybe more essential type of primordial type of reality, and facing back to the everyday creates nausea, and also he says an ascetic will negating mood is a fruit of these states after you come back. So there is the tendency to deny the will again, a la Schopenhauer, a la Hamlet, and so forth. That is a state of the Dionysian man, I believe, is the thing that I'm getting.
Okay, but that's not what kind of what I'm chasing here, because Nietzsche, let's do the quote again. just to be clear about what it is that he's saying here. So here, when he has the Dionysian knowledge, when the danger to his will is greatest, art approaches as a saving sorceress, expert at healing. She alone knows how to turn these nauseous thoughts about the horror or absurdity of existence into notions with which one can live. These are the sublime as the artistic taming of the horrible, and the comic as the artistic discharge of the nausea of absurdity. The satyr chorus of the dithyramb is the saving deed of Greek art. Faced with the intermediary world of these Dionysian companions, the feelings described here exhausted themselves. And I think that this famous passage from Aristotle, through pity and fear, affecting the proper purgation of these emotions, is exactly what Nietzsche is describing.
Okay.
That's the role that art, the dithyramb itself, is playing.
I think I actually kind of got what Nick said about the opposition of the reality in terms of the Dionysius principle. I think he meant, Nick, if you see that quote, in the quote, it said the horror and absurdity of existence. I think that refers to the reality in which we live. You know, the horror, the absurdity. I think in layman's term, it means like how we reconcile with the death, or the, you know, like the very practical or the very mundane responsibilities and the duties in life, you know, how we reconcile that with our artistic, aesthetical, you know, like the pursuit in terms of the Dionysius, you know, the tendency. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. But I believe also Lindsay is right. He does say after that quote that we've gone through in the last paragraph, he does say art saves.
Yeah.
Art saves us. Art retrieves us from this nausea, I guess, or this absurdity.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
in that sense, I think that's just, I still don't, I don't know that I would make the jump back to Aristotle though, about, you know, the comic relief or the purgation things. It doesn't jump out at me, but perhaps I'm just missing it.
Yeah, I think that it's one of the more famous descriptions of what this kind of art does, and that purgation of those feelings. It's, I think, one of the most important passages, because that's almost the function of art, is to give some meaning to life, which we had discussed earlier, and to give life a kind of shape that it actually doesn't really have when you look at the real bottom of the whole thing. And so that's that purgation. Those terrible feelings are purged by exposure to, in this case, the dithyrambs. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Moving on. So we're starting section 8 now, and I think we'll be able to finish this today.
Can I just, Lindsay, can I just add one more? Perhaps it might help if you, if we parse a little bit more the statement that saying these are the sublime as the artistic taming of the horrible, and the comic as the artistic discharge of the nausea of absurdity. How does the sublime tame the horrible? How does the comic discharge the nausea of absurdity? Is this the purgation that you're referring to?
Well, I think Aristotle wasn't looking at comedy. Presumptively, he wrote something on comedy that was never ever didn't survive. So the purgation of fear and whatever the other thing is that Aristotle mentions, that's the sublime. The sublime, and it's maybe that's a difficult word to might give a real clearer expression to, but I mean, I think it's just the satisfaction of having, like when you there's something sublime about a beautiful symphony. And it's elevated above, you know, a rock concert, let's say. So it's just this artistic expression of the horror in a dramatic performance. That's what I think he's just sort of using that adjective of sublime to describe that appreciation of see. And I know that's how it's sometimes if you're watching a movie and you start to cry, there's a certain amount of purgation going on there. Catharsis, actually. This is the famous, I should have found a cathartic quote. Catharsis releases that pain that you're feeling at what's happening to the dramatic art that you're watching. And so you release that from yourself, and that in itself is a catharsis of sorts. I don't know what else to do. The comic is just when you laugh. Usually you're gonna, absurdity is the heart of a joke. Almost every joke has got a measure of absurdity attached to it. And comedy we're really not going to get to because Nietzsche wasn't interested in that. We're going to have it referred to as new comedy, but we'll find out what he means by that when the time comes. Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, the satyr was the archetype of man, the embodiment of his highest and most intense emotions, the ecstatic reveler enraptured by the proximity of his God, the sympathetic companion in whom the suffering of the God is repeated, one who proclaims wisdom from the very heart of nature, a symbol of the sexual omnipotence of nature, which the Greeks used to contemplate with reverent wonder. The true human being was being disclosed, the bearded satyr jubilating to his God. Confronted with him, the man of culture shriveled into a mendacious caricature. So these are depictions on vases of the satyr. Notice the erect organ, and the satyr is just having one heck of a good time. So, is culture always mere appearance? That's what I was thinking. If there's anything else you want to comment on without following my lead, please go ahead. But that was what popped into my head when I read this, because the implication seems to be that all culture is a fabrication, a made up reality, partly with perfectly good purposes in a way, because it holds us all together. We have world of laws, constitutions, and all this other stuff. But in the final analysis, the satyr, he's saying, expresses the most fundamental truth about people. We just want to, we're all in it together, and we're going to party, but watch out, because there's a lot of pain and agony that comes along with it, because our God, Dionysus, has suffered.
I think the thing is it really depends on the depth in the culture, because there are cultures in the world which are more primitive than others, right? Depending on the levels of the civilizations. For example, maybe it's a bad example, but I feel like for some cultures, maybe the culture is mainly revolve around food, like material pursuit. And those culture basically appearances, right? They didn't really go deeper. But for the long-standing civilizations where they established their certain conventions, customs, deep thinking of ideas, systematic philosophical methods, then the culture going to becomes in depth, and that becomes a civilization.
Yeah. No, that's right. I think you're right about that sort of thing. The more primitive, it's the primitivity, the fundamental basic, like the cave person who's just struggling for existence from one day to the next and hasn't built up any real culture around him at all. That's who the satyr represents. And when you watch this on a stage in a safe environment, which we'll get to in a minute, let me save that part because that's, I think, the next section, which is kind of a little bit longer. Yeah, James, you look secure this time, so I think.
Yeah, it's a new cable modem, and the Ethernet, for some reason, was really slow, and now I'm on so I moved to an Ethernet cable, so now it's fast.
Oh, okay, cool, great. You missed a lot. Okay, no, you didn't. You
My
missed
fault.
a little. Yeah, that's you read the chapter, so you know where we're going anyway. All right, here we go. The contrast between this real truth of nature and the lie of culture that poses as if it were the only reality is similar to that between the eternal core of things, the thing in itself, and the whole world of appearances. Just as tragedy, with its metaphysical comfort, points to the eternal life of this core of existence, which abides through the perpetual destruction of appearances, the symbolism of the satyr chorus proclaims this primordial relationship. The idyllic shepherd of modern man is merely a counterfeit of the sum of cultural illusions that are allegedly nature. The Dionysian Greek wants truth and nature in their most forceful form and sees himself changed, as if by magic, into a satyr. Is it possible for modern people who see themselves in the idyllic shepherd to feel what Nietzsche claims the Greeks felt when he sees himself changed, as if by magic, into a satyr? So I think what I'm thinking about that is that we do not have the same level of belief. I'm jumping a little bit ahead, I think, about what Nietzsche's going to be saying, but the Greek believed in the gods, believed in them the same way that Christians believe in the divinity of Jesus. And so the shepherd for a modern man is not the fundamental human being that the satyr was to the Greeks when they saw the Dionysian festivals. And so it's not the same thing at all. And I think that's really what Nietzsche's trying to get at. Again, I think it's another little bit of a slam at modern culture. And just trying to develop this theme of how the Greeks felt differently when they watched these things. There was a religious intensity. I don't know if any of you, I think some of you are here when I was recommending, because I tried to think of a Christian analog or a modern analog to what a tragedy might be. And I referred to Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of the Christ. And Passion plays in general around Easter time, because Easter is a celebration of the resurrection and the crucifixion and all that sort of stuff. And The Passion of the Christ, it's available on Amazon. And I think it's, if you are a believer, it's a very, very powerful and moving film. And it's about as close as a modern person can get to what I think Nietzsche is saying the Greek felt watching these things at a similar festival, drunk as a skunk. Okay, are we moving on? I guess we are. Okie dokie. I think this next one's a little bit long-winded, but the satyr chorus is, first of all, a vision of the Dionysian mass of spectators, just as the world of the stage, in turn, is a vision of this satyr chorus. The force of this vision is strong enough to make the eye insensitive and blind to the impression of reality, to the men of culture who occupy the rows of seats all around. The form of the Greek theater recalls a lonely valley in the mountains. The architecture of the scene appears like a luminous cloud formation that the bacchantes swarming over the mountains behold from a height, like the splendid frame in which the image of Dionysus is revealed to them. The Dionysian excitement is capable of communicating this artistic gift to a multitude, so they can see themselves surrounded by such a host of spirits, while knowing themselves to be essentially one of them. This process of the tragic chorus is the dramatic proto-phenomenon. This process stands at the beginning of the origin of drama. Here we have a surrender of individuality and a way of entering into another character. And this phenomenon is encountered epidemically. The whole throng experiences the magic of this transformation. The Dionysian reveler sees himself as a satyr, and as a satyr in turn, he sees the god, which means that he beholds another vision outside himself as the Apollinian complement of his own state. With this new vision, the drama is complete. So this is another shot. This is the theater at Athens, Theater of Dionysus. And it said, just to remind you how this was located. And when he's referring to the fact that you could see all around, and that once they could seat 17,000 people in this theater. And every one of them lost his sense of himself as a spectator in the satyr chorus that was dancing in the orchestra. And this was a thought I had here. Is this identification with the satyr the same thing as Coleridge's willing suspension of disbelief?
What does that mean, willing suspension of disbelief?
It means when you're watching a TV show and you like the characters, you willingly suspend your awareness that it's just a TV show or it's just a movie. You enter into that space.
I see. I think Nietzsche is just very literally rhetoric. Like if you look at his sentences, he doesn't really expand his ideas that much. For example, when he says about the mountain, the chorus is like a mountainy sorry, I can't find where it is. Oh, he said the form of the Greek theater reminds one of a lonesome, mountainy valley. The architecture of the scene is a luminous cloud picture, and the Bacchants swarming on the mountains behold this picture from the heights. The splendid encirclement in the midst of which is visible the image of Dionysus. Okay, this is a very beautiful sentence, but when you take a close look, it doesn't mean anything. It's very poetical, it's beautiful, it just gives them imagery. I feel like sometimes Nietzsche lacks the ability to expand out his ideas. Like a lot of things he's talking about, like, like you said, it's kind of meandering and a little bit ponderous, which is okay, because I think what he's trying to create in this essay is about to intoxicate us with his language. The glam in the language, making we feel like that, bring out that Dionysus, like the feeling and the passions, which I understand, but just like from the not scientific, like the purely, the, I don't know, analytical perspective, I just feel like that's his flaws, It's prose essay, but I feel like sometimes he can cut down a little bit, when you read the second time, you feel like it's a little bit repetitive.
When we get to the end, section 15, I don't know if you noticed, but we're only going to read up to section 15, and then we're going to skip all the Wagnerian stuff and do the preface. And I think you got to remember, this is his first book. And so I think he acknowledges a lot of the clumsiness in some of the writing, but the feeling I get along the way, and also he has things in the wrong place, if you want to really get, I think, critical of the writing itself, because he says, and art saves him and life. And you go, how? At that point, you're going like, what? What are you talking about? And because he takes 3 more chapters to explain what he just said, which but the other thing, coming to Nietzsche's defense in a way, is even though the language is poetical, I think he's trying to get at something that almost escapes language, which is that transference. Freud wasn't around, so he wasn't able to use a lot of the more psychoanalytic kind of language of getting at the experience that the Greek was experiencing. And so he's trying to use more like modern metaphors in a way, and he has no way to really grasp. It's so hard to explain anyway, that sense of losing yourself. Coleridge said willing suspension of disbelief. And the reason I pulled that out was I thought that was an effort to get at it. But what I think Nietzsche is saying is that the Greek audience there was no willing at all. It was a suspension of disbelief. It was a lack of disbelief almost. Sitting in that audience, watching the dithyramb in the very beginning, the proto-drama, the proto-course. This is the beginning of dramatic art. And the immersion of the audience into the chorus was complete. As complete as it can be. In imagining yourself to be another person. It's like a TV example I gave you a minute ago. That is, we're too sophisticated or not willing to believe in the same way. We don't really believe those are real people on television. But the spectator at the dithyramb believed that they were satyrs.
I think well, yeah, sorry, go ahead, sorry.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Lindsay, I think like as long as it's a good story, it's a good tragedy, and all the emotional or like the elements are resonating with everyday personal experiences, it can definitely, you know, I think move people. Just like a good novel, you know, the characterization and stuff. So even with theatrical, very exaggeration props or the satyr scenes, it's still gonna be entirely moving. So I feel like Nietzsche is just it's kind of like, I'm not trying to criticize, but I'm just saying it's an exaggeration way of saying immerse yourself into the characters when it's a good play.
Yeah, well, he was only 28 years old, and he was just,
28 years old. Okay.
Well, Nietzsche is pretty clear that he doesn't believe that the subject matter appeals in the same way to modern spectators. In other words, we don't believe in the Greek gods at all. We don't believe in any of the we don't have a direct connection to the suffering of the characters in terms of like which gods they disappointed and so forth. So we don't. We have a comparison in Christianity, but it's not. He says that it's not possible for us to actually put ourselves in the place of the Greek audience. So he's pretty clear about that, I think. And I like the fact that he develops some ideas in later sections. In other words, we're dealing with a lot of the same theme in section after section. It's all about the Greek tragedy, but each section introduces more material, more information, more expands the field of understanding. So I think the step-by-step approach he's using makes sense to me.
Yeah, I do think there's a certain clumsiness to it all, though. Nick. You're muted, Nick.
Sorry, yes. I'm trying to picture this because what I think he's saying here is that the Dionysian mask, which is in the middle of the theater, I believe, but at the bottom, that represents, he's saying, the spectator itself, and the spectator, which are the audience around the theater, somehow gets into that middle where the Dionysian crowd is, and experiences reality in their terms in such a way that he says that he is no longer he no longer sees the culture, the men of culture around the theater around who is watching.
Mhm.
So there's kind of like a transformation or a kind of somehow an empathic relationship with that Dionysian chorus.
Yeah.
What about by that? By somehow.
Well,
So
you experience the same thing in some ways. When you go to a play, the theater can be completely filled. And as the actors perform and you get involved in the story, you lose sight of the people. You no longer feel part of this audience. You're unaware. You may feel it, but you're unaware of, then you're in an audience because you have now, willing suspension of disbelief, entered into the stage space. I think that's really all he's trying to get at here. And I think this is the important part. That's why I repeated that Schiller comment or put it back up at the front again. The chorus represents the wall separating the spectator from the vision that the chorus is experiencing. They are, as the bacchantes, actually experiencing it. I think he says that in the next section I have. They see their God because they're believers. They believe and they are feeling it. And the spectator observing this becomes part of that vicariously, if you will. Yeah, Nikolai. You're muted, Nikolai.
Does art imitate life, or does life imitate art?
Art makes life. Art creates life. Art puts structure, gives structure and meaning to life. Life comes. What?
Me put that in my chat, in the chat, your quote.
Oh, I don't even know what I just said. You're kidding? No, it's on you to make notes. Not me to give you the note.
I have a quote for you, Nikolai. There is a quote from Nietzsche here.
Okay,
So I'll put that in the chat.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate that.
I have a question. So why the Greek either have like extreme tragic theater performance or have like a super absurd comical but idiosyncratic comedy, but they don't have anything in the middle? That's my only.
Okay, they may have. They're probably, well, okay, here's the thing. The Greeks invented drama. Okay, so there may not have been any other forms of expression. We're going to get into how Euripides changed everything and made what we think of as modern drama possible. So tragedy is its own artistic box. Greek tragedy, Attic tragedy. It's something different from all world literature in what Nietzsche is claiming it accomplishes. And that's kind of where we're heading, is to see what that accomplishment is. And so at the very beginning, it was just these festivals, and that's when you saw the chorus. This is all the very birth of theater, practically. You know, so that's why there were other things that people did. I mean, they went to the Agora and chatted with Socrates, all this other sort of stuff. So there were other forms of entertainment beyond this. These were annual festivals where these were performed. They weren't regular, ongoing. You know, oh, let's go see a tragedy this weekend, Doris. You know, it wasn't like that. So, Nick.
Well, you just kind of triggered a thought in me. I believe this is also from Nietzsche, that actually the start of the tragedy and the chorus was dancing and so forth, was more of there was a military nature to it. It was how, in some ways, they prepared the military in order to be kind of in sync together, so forth. I believe, isn't that something that Nietzsche wrote one point regarding tragedy? No?
Well,
in this work, maybe somewhere else?
I'm going to guess somewhere else because I don't remember stumbling across that particular remark. I don't think it would be proper to assign a military sense to, there's too much order and too much control. And my picture of the Dionysian chorus is just a bunch of people reveling, dancing, and the dithyrambs were poetic expressions, and it was accompanied by music. We've sort of lost track of the musical part of this, but I'm not sure that, I think that's the least convincing part of his case. But anyway, he was stuck on Schopenhauer at the time, so that's why it was such a big deal. Yeah, there must have been some order, I suppose, but it's hard. He doesn't tell us whether there were directors or not. But if there was when the dithyrambs were performed, there must almost certainly have been because the dithyrambs are poems, and some of them, I think, survive. So that's how he knows it's lyric poetry. Yeah. Okay. In the light of this insight, we must understand Greek tragedy as the Dionysian chorus, which ever anew discharges itself in an Apollinian world of images. Thus, the choral parts with which tragedy is interlaced are, as it were, the womb that gave birth to the whole of the so-called dialogue, that is, the entire world of the stage, the real drama. In several successive discharges, this primal ground of tragedy radiates this vision of the drama, which is by all means a dream apparition, and to that extent, epic in nature. But on the other hand, being the objectification of a Dionysian state, it represents not Apollinian redemption through mere appearance, but on the contrary, the shattering of the individual and his fusion with the primal being. Thus, the drama is the Dionysian embodiment of Dionysian insights and effects, and thereby separated as by a tremendous chasm from the epic. So, how are they fused? How are the Apollinian and Dionysian impulses fused in tragic drama? And he sort of explains them, but sometimes these questions are hard to come up with. And I think this is one of the more lame ones that I have, because he sort of explains it all in its own way. They're fused. Does anybody want to offer before I offer mine? No.
I can say something. I have I don't think this is really Nietzsche's point that they're fused. He said that the spheres are taken up as competing in a separate unity. In the Dionysian lyric of the chorus, and on the other hand, in the Apollonian dream world of the scene as expressive spheres completely separate from each other. And that's the quote. He actually says they're completely separate from each other. So he feels that these are competing experiences that are dynamically kind of like present in the tragedy. There's the lyric of the chorus, the satyr chorus, and that's the Dionysian part of it. And the Apollonian dream world is the background of the scene containing the characters. Two different expressive spheres.
Fused into one performance. That's what I meant. I think I chose that word fused. I'm not sure if he used it or if I used it. It's all in a single space.
Yeah, they're both not in the chorus. He sees the characters on the stage, not the chorus, as the Apollonian dream world, as portraying the Apollonian dream world. He sees the satyrs as the Dionysian influence. So he doesn't say they're fused. He says they're completely separate, actually.
Oh, I know. Well, I thought I just apologized for saying fused. They are in the same performance. The chorus will represent the Dionysian reality and what's on the stage. And this, we're not quite there yet. There's still one more section. Is the Apollinian dream world, and they are all in the same space, occurring at the same time.
Right, and it's interesting. It's interesting. The video I saw of the play, what showed the chorus actually there with the characters on stage, but Nietzsche describes the chorus being in a separate section, which I've heard before. The chorus is in one place, and the characters are in another place. So it's a question of like what the portrayal is. It the modern version, or is it the ancient Greek stage, which had a special chorus, a place for the chorus to stand?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, this is one of the difficulties of the book, I think, is that, especially maybe this chapter, is because he's rushing through the development from the dithyramb, the Dionysian dithyramb, which is just the chorus and an imaginary god. Well, let me get to the next section, because I think the next section I've got sort of describes, if it doesn't, I've got it in my head about how in the beginning there was no god on a stage. And then somebody came up with, let's put on a god suit and show up, actually be there. And so this is developmental. And when you get to the classic age, that's when the two elements are probably on the same stage together. And the orchestra has become just another place. I don't know if any of this is true or not, but I'm guessing that that's sort of how it is. So let me do the next section here. We recognize in tragedy a sweeping opposition of styles. This is what I think you were saying. The language, color, ability, and dynamics of speech fall apart in the Dionysian lyrics of the chorus. And on the other hand, the Apollinian dream world, and they become two utterly different spheres of expression. The Apollinian appearances in which Dionysus objectifies himself are no longer an eternal sea, changeful strife, glowing life, like the music of the chorus. No longer those forces, merely felt and not condensed into images, in which the enraptured servant of Dionysus senses the nearness of the god. Now the clarity and firmness of epic form addresses him from the scene. Now Dionysus no longer speaks through forces, but as an epic hero, almost in the language of Homer. I think that's the end. Has the argument, okay. It may be a little bit premature. This is sort of the conclusion of the argument. He rushed through, I think, at the very end. He set the stage for the notion was establishing the birth of tragedy. How did tragedy come to be in the first place? And then he identified the Apollinian and Dionysian artistic forces that come together and appear in the same space. Only that the intoxicated force now comes out in Apollinian speech, describing itself instead of being itself. That's sort of what I think he's kind of getting at here. So do you think he's accomplished the argument? I tried to put some of the pieces together in the beginning in my summary of where we've been, because he's done at this point. Now he's going to give some examples of tragedy and talk about how this all functions and works and what happened to tragedy and
What does
why.
it mean by the last sentence?
What?
But as an what does that mean by the last sentence? But as an epic hero, almost with the tone of a Homer.
The language in Homer is imagistic and detailed, and there's no expression of a pain and feeling. That's not what the epic is about. It's about things and events and the gods and all this sort of stuff. And there's not a whole lot of it. You bring your own emotion into it. It's not handed to you on a platter. In tragedy, it's handed to you on a platter with the same kind of epic language. Only now the subject is the pain, the contradiction, the difficulties, the reality of the world presented on the stage. And that itself is an Apollinian expression. The whole creation of the stage, the drama, this is part of the desire for form and beauty. And so the words describing all of this horrible stuff come out in the language of Homer. That's what I think he means. That Greek tragedy reaches that, and that's partly that what I was calling the fusion again. The Dionysian sensibility is being put out there with language, artistic language, expressive language, not being felt as an emotion necessarily, but being put into words. And not just, and you'll see when, if you, the next thing I've got planned here is, I'll tell you in a second, Jason.
Yeah, I just have a question on the sameness, Nicole. And the Dionysius no longer speaks through forces, but as an epic hero, almost in the language of Homer. So I think, suppose when we finish 8 from chapter 9 and 10, Nietzsche is going to talk about the birth of tragedy, right? So far, he haven't talked about the birth of, but here.
No, he solved the problem. The birth of tragedy is in the Dionysian dithyramb.
So right now he already, okay, so the next section is the example, not.
Yes, of the finished product, yes.
Okay, okay. I think I still not get into his structure of his language. So.
It begins with the dithyramb. And the dithyramb is created. It's an Apollinian expression. And the only reason that comes about is because of the kind of nature that the Greek culture inspired, which was fundamentally more Apollinian than Dionysian. And that's where the gods came from. And that's why they built all these spectacular buildings and created all of these lifelike sculptures. This was an imitation of life. Of living people and a chasing after form and beauty, and Greeks did this, and nobody else in the neighborhood did. The Greeks were unique in these kinds of buildings and the things that they were doing. And what he's saying is that this is a culture that has Apollinian roots. The Greek gods sprang from that Apollinian drive for form and shape and they created this human pantheon of gods for the most part.
So does the last sentence, almost in the language of Homer, he's talking about the death of the tragedy?
No, not yet. No. He's exalting tragedy as an epic form, Dionysian expression.
Okay.
Dionysian experience expressed in the language of Homer, the elevated artistic poetry of Homer.
All right, got you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. James.
Yeah, I have a slight difference in the translations. I've got in the Kaufmann, I've got now the clarity and firmness of the epic form addresses him from the scene. And the scene is where the actors are, not the chorus, not the dithyramb. So the epic form is coming from the scene, and he's talking about, prior to that, he's talking about how the forces, unlike the Apollonian appearances in which Dionysus objectifies himself, are no longer an eternal sea, changeful strife, a glowing life, like the music of the chorus. No longer those forces, merely felt and not condensed into images, in which the enraptured servant of Dionysus senses the nearness of the god. And so I think, like right here, it's this acting area. In other words, where the chorus is in charge, then there's the possibility of the poetic, right? The poetic is more or less in charge. But in the scene, as a contrast in styles, he says, Nietzsche says, from the acting area, which of course it's not as clear it's not as clear in the Kaufmann, but in this other translation, I'm sorry, I don't have the name right now, but I'll give it to you. From the acting area, the clarity and solemnity of the epic form, which would be the Apollinian form, speak to him. Now Dionysus no longer speaks through forces, but as an epic hero. In other words, the words of heroes is now on stage, almost with the language of Homer. So there's a lot of metaphor here. There's a lot of, so you have to be a little bit patient with it, but there is that kind of. My translator is this other translator is Ian Johnston of Vancouver Island University,
Oh,
British Columbia.
Yeah, he's I'll set you up for the next thing that we're going to do here. He's also the translator of Prometheus, so you may enjoy that. Yeah, you get the same idea though, right? We're now at the end of the argument. The argument was basically to set the stage for the kind of audience transference that occurred watching the chorus, the satyr chorus, perform the dithyramb in the absence of a god. And then the god appears on the stage, and then it's transformed even further. And he does that in like 3 paragraphs instead of 28 pages. So, but if he's going after the birth of tragedy, I think he has suggested a really, really provocative thought about how it came to be in Greece and nowhere else in the world.
Now, it just occurred to me that this reminds me a little bit of opera and musical theater, because in opera you have arias, but you also have those things they put in between the arias, where they I forget what they call them, where they sing, but they sing stop time. They sing in stop time. They don't sing lyrically. And then in musical theater, they have songs, but then they stop the songs and they just talk for a while. So you do have that same kind of like disconnect in opera and musical theater that maybe you have in Greek tragedy. Just saying.
Yeah, no, it's a similar sort of thing. I think movies are like that too, frankly, because the score for a movie can provide what Nietzsche would call, I think, the Dionysian element. It amplifies through that unmediated effect of music. If it's happy music, you smile. If it's tense music, you're more on edge than if the music isn't there. Even if it's can be just undertones of melody that are kind of. I went to see a horror movie yesterday. It had a great score because all the scary stuff was underscored by this music that was just great to keep you right on the edge of your seat. So that it's an experience. It's not like they were the only ones that had this, but they had an experience that was elevated to a level that I don't think we can experience today and appreciate in the same way, except, and that's what I suggested about the Passion of the Christ. If you are a believer, that film will tear you up, but make you feel great by the time it's over with.
What about the medieval passions? They had passion plays, right? In medieval times.
Yeah. Those wouldn't characterize. There's a different atmosphere about heaven is there. Jesus, is resuscitated and goes up in the sky and all that stuff. There's that background that's not present in Greek tragedy. The awareness that we're all going to die is there. They're aware of that. And so the sensibility is different. The approach is different. And you'll see that when you read, because that's what we're going to do. Nick? Yes.
Yeah, I feel like you kind of jumped some steps, and I would kind of like to read a passage that is for me more gives me more the light bulb on how the merging occurs, or how the Dionysian ends up speaking in epic form of Apollonian, so forth. So because there is a paragraph in my version, which is the Kaufmann version that I'm using right now. There's a paragraph that starts with the dithyramb is that essentially different from all choral odes. That's not in the middle of that paragraph. There's the thing about The dithyrambic chorus is a chorus of transformed characters whose civic past and social status have been totally forgotten. They have become timeless servants of their God who live outside the spheres of society. All the other choral lyric poetry of the Hellenes is merely a tremendous intensification of the Apollonian solo singer, while in the dithyrambic confront community of unconscious actors who consider themselves and one another transformed. So again, this is like underscoring the transformation that the Dionysian chorus gives and the participation of the audience in that, maybe.
Yeah.
But then he goes on. Such magic transformation is the presupposition of all dramatic art. In this magic transformation, the Dionysian reveler sees himself as satyr. And as a satyr, in turn, he sees the god, which means that in his metamorphosis, he beholds another vision outside himself as the Apollonian complement of his own state. With this new vision, the drama is complete. So it seems like the audience transforms, as a person transforms into a satyr, the satyr sees the god, and the god somehow is also representative of this Apollonian complement of his own state. It's kind of an Apollonian state.
Yeah.
There's this kind of like, if I'm reading it correctly or understanding it correctly, then this kind of thing is the essential thing that kind of allows them to kind of merge the Apollonian with, and I'm seeing the Apollonian as, I'm not clear about what the Apollonian is on the stage at this point. I mean, are the actors speaking parts, or
Apollinian is the actor as a character in a drama.
okay,
That's the Apollinian part. This is an artistic creation.
right, okay,
That's the Apollinian part. Dionysus doesn't do that. The Dionysian is not. It dissolves everything. It doesn't build something up. And the Apollinian impulse is to build something up.
right. But somehow you say at the end that it's the Dionysian voice is now no longer speaks through forces, but is actually speaking in the language of Homer, in words, in the epic form.
Right.
At the end, somehow that, so there's kind of a merging of the two. So essentially, has the Dionysian kind of absorbed all the Apollonian and transformed it into its form, or
The other way around. The
the other way
Apollinian,
around?
Dionysian. And you'll see next time we're going to read the tragedy. Okay, we're going to do Prometheus Bound, and you now armed with the last 8 sessions we've had, you'll see it in a different light. Then if you just picked it up and read it before we started this, it'll be a different experience for you, because you will have these insights into what's the Dionysian. The words express. In the beginning, you have the revelers, and they're chanting or doing whatever they're doing, and the audience loses itself in that spirit and feels as if they're one of them, worshiping their god. And then when the god first shows up on the stage for the first time, that must have been a really stunning moment, if you really get into that headspace in a way, like, whoa, check it out. Well, that's the Apollinian bit coming into play. That's the artistic representation of Dionysus himself, the god of this intoxicated state.
But the god Dionysus, when he appears, what does he look like?
Oh, I don't know. They had a mask. It's an actor with a mask on.
With a mask, but he
That's all.
doesn't look. He doesn't look Apollinian at all. He looks more like.
Well, no, don't get lost in the Apollo part. The Apollinian is an artistic force. That's all it is. It's not Apollo. It's just a force of creation that leans toward beauty, form, structure. And Dionysian artistic impulses breaks all that apart and just has fun and loses itself, but feels and is aware of how foolish and stupid everything is at the bottom.
Nick, I think
Wait. James has put his hand up, so he's ahead of
sorry.
you. Keep that thought.
Okay, I'm just going to be quick anyway. Yeah, but this really appealed to me. This paragraph that you read, Nick. I think for one thing, it says the dithyrambic chorus is a chorus of transformed people. So they forget, right? They forget about who they are, right? And then and they become God's timeless servants, living beyond all regions of society. And then it ends. And I made a note, just like I struck it, you know. Whereas in the dithyram, in the satyr chorus, a congregation of unconscious actors stands before us, who look upon each other as transformed. That's the other. That's I didn't find that in the. I think I'm in the right place in the book, but I didn't see it yet. But the point is that this reminds me of EST or the congregational church or something like that. You know, like where you go to church and then at the end of the service, everybody's like looking at each other. Holy shit! You know, we did that. That's incredible. You know, we're so close to God now. And this is kind of like the transformation experience. And it was like what was it? I did. What was it? The successor of EST was Landmark, but I did that. But it was like the whole idea is like you look at everybody and you say, "Holy smokes, we're not the people that came into this room originally, right?" And that's kind of, and it happens sometimes in some churches. They do that. You know, it's like so there's kind of like that possibility of transformation. And I think that's what Nietzsche is talking about here, that transformation happening in the chorus for the audience.
Happening in the audience. The transformation happens at a different level in the chorus, in the dithyram, in the beginning. But this is a religious experience. Nietzsche doesn't emphasize that enough. It's a religious, exactly what you're talking about, being in a church or getting lost in the spiritual, let's say. Everybody's singing along, and like some of the black churches, they really get into the whole spirit of the thing. And depending on what the words are, that immersion into the crowd is a Dionysian experience. But it's religiously based because you are believing in what's going on around you as something special and remarkable. Nicole, last word.
I just wanted to respond to what Nick said about the last paragraph. Nick, you see, there's like a sentence here, which is in German, in my translation. The Apollinian appearances in which Dionysius objectifies himself are no longer, I don't know the German, but the translation is an eternal sea, a weaving, flowing life. So I conjecture, like Lindsay said, when the Apollinian god appears on the stage, so the Dionysius chorus becomes quiet, right? So I guess that's a submission to the Apollinian god. Then it leads to the cleanness and the firmness of epic form in the time of Homer, because that's the Apollinian appearance dominates the stage. I think that's my interpretation.
Yeah. It's a process that occurs over time. That's what he doesn't develop at any great length, I think. But so he kind of rushes through this interaction between the Apollinian artistic impulse and Dionysian artistic impulse takes a long time, a century or whatever. I'm not really sure how long it is, but it's just in a couple of months, we're to Greek tragedy. We're not. This occurs over a period of time. And that development is what is happening, I think. I think that's what he's saying.
And also a question with regards to the religious experience, because in the previous chapter, the chapter 7, there's a sentence he said the longing the longing for a Buddhistic negation of the will.
Yeah.
Art saves him, and through art life saves him for himself. And also he said there's a lethargic element.
Yeah. Yeah, we did that last week.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
go
these two words, lethargic element and the Buddhism, like, the negation of the will. I think he's suggesting when you get into the immersion of the Dionysus, the emotions, you kind of reach this transcendental state where you reach the oneness, where it's godlike. But I don't feel like it's not in the religious sense. It's more in the spiritual sense.
Well,
Otherwise,
okay.
he's not going to mention the Buddhism, right? That like the transcendental oneness, the unity.
Well, the importance of that is he was borrowing that from Schopenhauer, the phrase, but that's okay. And what it means essentially is the nirvana is the moment of enlightenment where you no longer have to come back and be reincarnated again. So in a way, the Buddhist negation of the will means a rejection of the life force. And that's what that's that feeling that you get when you're exposed to the truth, to the reality of the bottommost world. You don't want to keep going. That's the wisdom of Syllabus, which I don't think you were there for, which is it's better never to have been born. And if you have been born, it's better to die quickly.
Okay, so that's a pessimistic statement. Okay.
Oh, it is. No, it totally is. Totally is. But the Greeks escaped that through art. And that's what the tragic and the comic are. The recognition of that fundamental awfulness, but a redemption through art and a willingness to plunge on because life is great. And this is a theme that's really important to stay with through the rest, as long as we're doing Nietzsche, because that will be developed further and further and further. Somebody called him a pessimist last week. There is no Nietzsche and pessimism.
Yeah,
Nietzsche.
I feel like it's a Schopenhauer, but he's kind of like doing the reverse.
Yeah. He was sort of in the Schopenhauerian space for a while, but this was one of the early breaks. And in another book or two, we'll be completely done with Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche will be on his own. Oh, James.
Yeah, this particular passage to me is about the losing track of the personal experiences. You even lose track of your own personal experiences in that lethargic element. Oblivion separates the worlds of everyday reality and the Dionysian reality, the religious one, and the tragic one, and there's this sense of forgetting here. As like an existential sense of forgetting. And then as soon as the everyday reality enters consciousness, it is experienced with nausea. And I think he makes a comment. This is incredible because he definitely Kaufmann thinks this is incredible because it presages Sartre, right? His novel.
Yeah.
So this ascetic will negating mood is the fruit of these two states competing with each other, the reality state and the Dionysian state. And in the middle occurs forgetting and nausea. And it's just brilliant. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, I think it's brilliant too. That's why I'm doing this.
That's a Buddhism teaching, though.
What?
It's exactly what the Buddhism has taught, right?
Yeah.
The self-forgetting, the
Well, it's
right?
one thing is it's not unlike the audience experience that we have if we go to a theater. If you watch a movie on TV, it's different because all the distractions are still around. You got your phone on, blah, blah, blah. If you go to a movie theater, you become immersed in the movie. I do, at any rate. If you go to see a play, the lethargic element is you stop being aware of your own problems, your own issues. You are part of what's happening on the stage, at least if you're engaging as an audience member. and, you know, not checking your phone all the time or something like that. And I think that's the heart of the experience. We can still have that, but the kind of art that tragedy represented, we just don't have anymore. And because we don't believe in those gods, we can never, ever get it back. So next.
I still have a couple of questions here. One is that you guys may be able to help me out. There's always the dreamy, the Apollinian state is always described as a dreamy world. That I think I need, maybe I have a guess on what that means.
Okay.
And the other one, maybe if I could just finish, the other one is, it's not unclear to me how the presence of the god in the Dionysian chorus stage, when he makes an appearance, that transforms and enables the Dionysian um, to meld with the Apollonian, if you will, and to speak in Apollonian epic, if you will. So that part is kind of unclear to me.
That comes later. That's what I was trying to say earlier. That description is the very beginning of drama. Drama is the Greek tragedy is an Apollinian creation of Dionysian reality. That's what tragedy is, Greek tragedy, the classic Attic tragedy of Aeschylus and Sophocles. That's the case that Nietzsche is going to be making here. The what was the first thing?
Well, the first was a dreamy, the idea of Apollonian world is dreamy.
It's a waking dream. Think of a guy who's going to write a book. When you sit down, well, if you've ever written an essay, the words come and flow. It's almost like dreaming because you're not controlling what words. You know where you want to go. You know what you want to say. So the Apollinian artist knows what's in his imagination. So I would probably prefer to use that kind of thinking. The dream image is the imagination. It's like a waking dream. But that drive to the dreams are driven by an Apollinian impulse, and that's what he's trying to use. We have dreams, no idea why we dreamed what we dreamed, but we dreamed it anyway. And that's the Apollinian expression.
Got it.
I mean, existing.
I was guessing kind of that it might have something to do with the world of appearances, that the Apollonian is the world of appearance.
Yeah, well, yes,
primitive. Yeah. I mean that was another interpretation, but yours also. I mean, I start thinking in those terms too. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Sometimes I think Nietzsche is really more down to earth than a lot of us. It's just the words are difficult. He's expressing something that nobody had expressed before in attempting to get at the birth of tragedy. How did this art form occur? Why did it occur among the Greeks? And he's wandering around a lot. You know, it's like this was not written in his head. I don't know if he made notes and then put it all down. I'm not sure how he worked. But as a first expression, he gets much, much sharper in the things that he says down the road.
Also, I think what makes it hard for us is, like Nicole was mentioning, I think he writes sometimes more like a poet, if you will, you know, a kind of writing literature rather than what we see as philosophers doing. I mean, Schopenhauer is an eloquent writer and so forth, but he doesn't write in these poetic terms in the way Nietzsche does, who is also a great writer, but also a little unclearer because of his style.
I was going to mention Nietzsche is a philologist at this time. He's writing to the philologists, and he's basically, which that doesn't even exist today. That kind of like, I don't even think the Germans do it anymore. They call it classics in English, but the idea of like trying to figure out, you know, what was meant by the language or whatever. But so it's kind of like just basically trying to describe the Greek reality, and he's becoming very detailed here because he sees two different things going on: the Apollonian in the dream world on the stage, and the Dionysian in the dithyrambic chorus. And that's the all of these kind of like metaphors, descriptions, conclusions that he comes to. These are all based on that, based on basically that one single insight that he has, that there's the Apollonian going on because it's a tragedy and it's a play, but at the same time, there's a dithyramb and there's the Dionysian element, right? And we have some knowledge of that because that's like the idea of dancing, being drunk, going into a frenzy, all that idea, all that stuff. So yeah, so in other words, he just the whole, I guess if there's one sort of like constant theme, it's that reworking of that image applied to the tragedy. And he's also bringing in music too, and some of the ideas from Wagner in the future.
That comes, yeah, we're going to skip all that part though.
I actually, sorry, I
ahead.
just want to make a comment. I think what Nick said about the poetical language in Nietzsche, which separates him from other philosophers, I think it's actually a really amazing thing because, like, according to Bertrand Russell, he said in his books, like Nietzsche is essentially a literary figure as opposed to like a philosopher. As like James said, he focuses on theology a lot, and I think this is poetical element in him actually makes him much more intriguing to read compared to a lot of convolution and meanderings in other philosophers like Hegel, right? So even like I think I criticize about his language quite much, but I feel like it's still much more pleasant and pleasurable to read him as opposed to someone like Hegel. The convolution is different, the poetical language is beautiful. And also James said about the theology in German language. Like I think I've heard that it's very difficult to write poetically in German. I don't know if it's true, but people like Spengler actually got influence from Nietzsche as well. The sheer beautiful, like how they can actually do the rhetoric to such extent. I think it's quite impressive.
Well,
Yeah.
Kaufmann attributes as practically building the German language to Goethe and Nietzsche as great stylists of the German language. And Nietzsche didn't write like any philosopher had written before. Kierkegaard comes close in some ways, but Nietzsche seems more scattered than he really is in a lot of cases. Down the road, I don't know how far you've gotten with Nietzsche, but you'll really see the stunning clarity of some of the aphorisms. They're just unbelievable. They're so expressive, and even if there's ambiguity in there, you understand things. I did anyway in ways I never understood them before I read that. So that's where it's going. I just wanted to start from the beginning and work our way through, and so that's what we're doing. So I'm trying to cherry pick some of the things that I know will turn up later to focus on. But I've really become engrossed in this. I'll be honest with you, I really have. So I've already prepared the drafts for next week with links to the PDF versions of Prometheus Bound, and which is Aeschylus, and Euripides Alcestis. And Prometheus Bound is only 40 pages, so it's not a big read. It's part one of a three. All of the tragedies were presented in 3 parts. And the Orestia is the only complete 3-part from Aeschylus or Sophocles. We only have the first of most of them. So a lot of them are gone, but you'll get the real idea of in Prometheus Bound, especially since Nietzsche refers to that with some specificity in section 9. So I thought it would be a great idea. I'm going to pat myself on the back for thinking of it, to go ahead and read it. It's a short read, so that's one thing. Alcestis, you will get the drift. You don't have to read the whole thing, although it's good. It's not bad. But if you just read 20 pages, get to the chorus in Euripides, and section 9, 10, 11, 12 will become crystal clear to you. So that's what we're going to do. So I will post those, publish and announce them just as soon as we're done here. So just hang
Sounds
on
good.
for seconds and check your email and you'll get the notice and then you can RSVP. And I hope you all do. Nicole, where have you been? You
What?
should have been. Okay, all right. That's it. Yeah, we got there. Okay, dokie. All right, you guys.
All right.
See you next Wednesday.
All right, thank you. See you
so
next
Thank you.